Today we're talking to Brian Jarvis, former mayor of Beavercreek, a retired defense contractor who has a lot of information and background in city management. And we're going to ask him a few questions today about the earned income tax proposal that's on the ballot. So, Brian, let's talk a little bit about how a city receives operating revenue. How do we compare to a county or state, or even a county or state in raising revenue for city projects?
Right, Beavercreek is very unique in how it raises revenue. Of the 246 cities in Ohio, 242 of them have an income tax. Beavercreek is one of the four that does not. The three other cities are bedroom communities, and so more than half of Beavercreek's revenue for running the city comes from property taxes. And the other portion of that comes from some funding we get from the state and federal governments. Some of it is a very, very small amount from things like gasoline taxes, hotel, motel, lodging types of fees. There are some special assessments, but by and large, the majority is from property taxes. The county and the state receive money from sales taxes, which cities are prohibited from using, from levying. There are other types of taxes from your income taxes the state receives. The county does receive some money for things like your water and sewer that you pay, but those are totally different fee structures. Beavercreek's is primarily from property taxes, and those now are getting to be very, very large to maintain city services, as well as in comparison to the other surrounding cities in our region, especially Montgomery and Greene counties. Beavercreek's reliance only on property taxes is a tremendous difference from the other communities that are adjacent to us.
Since the city of Beavercreek is reliant on property taxes, do those property taxes go directly to the city of Beavercreek, or do they fund other things outside of Beavercreek?
Right. Beavercreek city property taxes only fund city services. They don't fund the school system, they don't fund the township, they don't fund, that's not quite true. A portion of Beavercreek city's property taxes, there's what's called inside millage. A portion of that does go to the township. So Beavercreek city residents don't realize this, but separate from the fire department, which is direct funded also from property taxes, with city inside millage, they send money over to the township. Similarly, with property taxes that the city residents pay, that goes to the county to maintain township roads that the county maintains, but very specifically to things like police, streets, and parks in the city, which are the city services. Those are collected by the county from your property taxes and then returned back to the city. The county auditor takes his portion to administer that. Totals about $218,000 a year to administer that, but that all comes back to the city for police, streets, and parks. Those are the primary functions that the city services.
So the city of Beavercreek is not competing with anybody for those property taxes outside the township?
You know, for city services, again, because Beavercreek is totally on property taxes, it competes with every other government entity for property taxes.
So those property taxes go not only to the city of Beavercreek, they're for other government organizations too.
Yet it turns out that with the property taxes that Beavercreek residents pay, only 17% of them are for city services. The other 83% is for other services. The school district is 54% of those. The county has its percentage that Beavercreek residents pay. The township, the Greene County Health out of Greene Memorial Hospital, we have the Beavercreek Township Park District, we have the Greene County Joint Vocational School. There are 6 or 7 government entities that Beavercreek city residents pay for out of their property taxes. Again, less than 17% of those are for city services, police, streets, and parks.
Wow. Okay. Having said that, how do the costs of running Beaver Creek, the city of Beaver Creek, stack up against other cities?
Yes, it's really interesting. With Beaver Creek being primarily on property taxes and no income taxes like all the cities are, if you do a comparison, for example, all of the other cities in Greene and Montgomery counties, so there's all the ones except for Bellbrook and Beaver Creek, all the other cities, they collect 6.5 times more revenue in income taxes than they do in property taxes. For everyone else, the primary source is income taxes. And they do that because in each of our respective cities, more non-residents work in adjacent cities than their own residents do, and therefore they can levy these charges against somebody else. It's other people's money, which they can do. Interestingly enough, the city of Beaver Creek collects about just over $20 million a year in city property taxes, just for city services. That is more for just city services than the cities of Dayton and Kettering collect together. The city of Beaver Creek has the highest amount of property tax collection of any city in Montgomery and Greene County, and more in total than Dayton and Kettering collect from city property taxes. In fact, the next 5 cities below those two, Fairborn, Huber Heights, Miamisburg, and I forget the other 2, the city of Beaver Creek collects more property taxes than those 5 cities, additional cities, do together. And that is all on the property owner, Beaver Creek residents and commercial property. At $20 million is a huge amount of revenue. In comparison to other cities, the city of Beaver Creek is way out of line with that. Now that may have worked well when Beaver Creek was a bedroom community in the 60s and the 70s and maybe in the 80s and perhaps in the 90s, because there wasn't a lot of industry and business here to collect income taxes from. But starting in the 2000s, the 2010s, and now 2020s, this is more of a burden than it is a benefit, because it really increases the cost of living here with such huge property tax burden on every taxable real property in the city.
I see. So what comes out of our city property taxes, and how does this funding maintain the quality of life for residents here in Beaver Creek?
Right. It's maintained the quality of life, at least on the surface, very, very well. People look at Beaver Creek and they want to move here. The school system is decent, no question about it. The roads are maintained, the asphalt and concrete, all things are doing well. People see that there's no income tax, and so people like that, of course, people like that, and businesses like that. But when you peel back the layers of the shelves of Beaver Creek, you see that it does that by deferring maintenance and deferring projects. By not collecting income tax and fully taxing people for the services that they're used to for this quality, the city of Beaver Creek now has a $200 million backlog in transportation network work, in flooding and drainage and catch basin and erosion issues, in sidewalks and curbs and things that it just can't perform. There's no money for that. For instance, when we look at how many times North Fairfield Road has been repaved between Claydor and Lakeview in the past decade, at least 3 times. It looks nice. When people drive it, it's nice and smooth, it looks good, but you look under the asphalt and all that's a foot underneath is all crumbling, which is going to mean another 2 years you've got to redo it all again. As you go throughout, you can turn that off, the light over there.
Yeah.
As you go throughout the city of Beaver Creek, you will find a lot of things like that, where it simply is not being maintained. It looks good, the veneer and facade looks good, but underneath it's crumbling. And so, yes, this has worked very well for us. As we on our committee have looked at the city's financial records, there has not been a single year in the past 20 years when property tax revenue was enough to cover all of the expenses for all the public services. The city has tried to use all that state and federal matching, share matching funds, what the state calls entitlements, to cover that gap. but there's always been some amount that's not covered, and that amount that's not covered now totals $200 million. And again, the city is going to have to perform that work someday, and but again, hopefully nobody's going to force us before the money is there.
So we've got 200 million in backlog projects. And Pete Landrum told us earlier, future requirements are around 180 million.
And that's just for the streets only. The 175 to 180 million is just for the transportation network, the streets and roads and things and bridges. You know, you still have the flooding and drainage and erosion and curbing and things not directly related to streets. So he is correct. That's the majority of it. But that is for the additional. You still have to maintain the city police force, streets and parks. The police need vehicles. The parks need swings and playground equipment and things. This year alone, for example, in 2020, for the police department, there's a shortage of revenue of $1.3 million of capital improvements they can't do. The Parks Department only has a shortage of $15,000. That doesn't sound like much, but that's after a $250,000 transfer of funding from the general fund to the Parks Department. And for the capital and streets improvement, the city is $1.8 million short in that. All those dollars are going to be added to the $200 million in order to do future work. And so the city right now would need to increase city property taxes by 60% within the next 3 years to cover all those needs. That's a huge amount of property tax increases on top of what's already been paid. And again, we think when the residents see that, they'll probably not vote for those levies because they're so extensive and expensive, and that would be a worse outcome because the city streets and roads and bridges would never be repaired, they'd never be maintained. That is just a third option that is not very good.
Okay. Going back to something you said, when we look at these property taxes, they're neutral. They don't grow with the property taxes. They don't grow with the increase in costs. And these property taxes, based on the growth, will no longer address the needs of this community.
That's true.
In a timely fashion. So those that say, well, we've got along 40 years without an income tax, we'll get along another 40. Well, actually, we won't. We won't. This city will degrade significantly over that time. Okay.
Yeah, well, if I could add to that a little bit. I compare property taxes to buying a new car. The moment you drive it off the lot, it loses value. Property taxes, you vote for a $1 million levy perhaps, but the minute it's in place, it loses buying power every single year. Over the past 10 years, the city of Beavercreek has grown at a rate of 0.8% per year. That's the total value of all properties in the city, 0.8% per year. Over that same 10-year period, inflation has averaged 1.6%. So you've got half the buying power gone over a 10-year period. Mm-hmm. You see why property taxes have to come back for a renewal and additional every 3 to 5 years. They lose so much buying power that with the price of inflation and buying products in concrete and asphalt and everything, all the commodities the city has to buy in addition to employees, which, the city is very service oriented. There are lots of employees that you have to fund. Property taxes do not keep up. If you look at our region, Montgomery-Greene counties again, all of the other cities with an income tax have done very, very well with increased revenue since the Great Recession, because there's been a rebound in the economy and they have collected lots more revenue, and Beavercreek has just sat there very, very flat with property taxes that keep losing value and losing value. It's had to come back with 4 more levies or 4 or 5 more levies the past 10 years, and at these ever increasing property valuations, those new levies are applied against these higher and higher valuations, which then takes more tax dollars from people's pockets that they can't spend in the community on retail and restaurants and things that they buy. So property taxes work great when you're a young, fledgling community, a bedroom community, But when you reach our size, the 22nd largest city in the state of Ohio, the third largest city in this region behind Dayton and Kettering, with a huge infrastructure need, a huge policing need, and a growing parks and recreation need, property taxes that just do no longer funded enough to handle all that.
Okay, so if I walk away from this conversation, my understanding is that funding is constrained for the city as far as how it can receive funding. It relies primarily on property taxes, which, with the growth of the population that comes through on a daily basis, whether they live here or work here, in addition to the aging infrastructure, our city, without an income tax, is the quality of life is going to be significantly affected in the out years here.
There's no question about that. As you look around cities around us that have not maintained their roads and streets, in a very few years, Beavercreek will look like those streets. There simply isn't the revenue. If you look at some police departments that have struggled because they can't add enough police officers to handle the growing needs in the community, you're going to see the safety in Beavercreek, which has always been top-notch. You're going to see the police response and other safety features begin to degrade. Our Parks Department, our Parks and Recreation, we have Rotary Park, Lafino Park. We have over 24 parks in the city of Beavercreek that all need to be maintained to the level of quality we've come to expect. You should not expect less quality from your streets and police and parks when you live in your city. You should expect all of these to be maintained and improved as it grows. Right now, the city of Beavercreek cannot do that. It needs to hire 3 police officers right now. The city of Beavercreek has 1 police officer per 1,000 residents. No other city in this region on a per capita basis has that small amount of police force. They are stretched to the limit. The current budget can't handle it. If you look at the number of centerline miles our road crews have to maintain, it is the least per capita of any city in this region. But on the dollars that we have to do it with, and those dollars are shrinking. The state of Ohio is going through some problems right now with its receipt of income taxes and sales taxes that is going to start reducing the amount of money it flows down to our communities. Beavercreek is going to get reduced amounts from the state. The gasoline tax that Beavercreek could have gotten because of COVID and the less driving is going to be lower. The hotel motel lodging fees Beavercreek would have gotten is going to be less because hotels are struggling right now with COVID. Every revenue source that Beavercreek was using to add to property taxes is being decreased. And you can see that in the auditor's report on the financial health of Beavercreek. Of the areas that it's auditing, 2 of them are cautionary and 1 of them is critical, meaning things are headed in the wrong direction. They've given us these warnings for 3 or 4 years now regarding our finances. And again, property taxes are really not the smart way to go because they're very, very narrow. They don't tax the broadest base. 75% of the jobs in Beavercreek are held by non-residents who work here. They can be contributing to the budgets to fund police, streets, and parks so that the rest of the Beavercreek community can have a little bit lower taxes. There are ways to do this better than just property taxes and have the city maintain the quality we've had for 40 years now, and it'd be true quality. Not just surface quality, but also the quality underneath the roads and streets and sidewalks that are out there.
Okay. Well, Brian Jarvis, thank you for coming in and talking to us.